Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this show today. Well, right now it is 12 degrees and sunny right here in Brisbane. Hey, cool mornings, and it is really chilly some of the mornings right here in Brisbane. But today it's a little bit of a smoky. I won't say it's cloudy, but there seems to be a bit of a smoke around. Moving on, let's go to the news highlight for today, courtesy of ABC.
The Coast Guard has announced that the 5 people on board the missing Titanic submersible have been declared dead. Debris from the craft was located by a deep-sea robotic vessel. The Coast Guard says it shows the submersible suffered a catastrophic loss of pressure. The company behind the venture, Ocean Gate, has sent its sympathy to the families of the dead. In breaking news overnight, a Brazilian man has been sentenced to 27 years in prison after confessing to killing his ex-girlfriend and dumping...
As the nation's politicians primped and preened for the Canberra Midwinter Ball, one group of regular attendees was conspicuously absent. PwC not present in Parliament's Great Hall, but still a topic of debate in other parts of the building.
PwC, a calculated breach of trust.
And there is across-the-board political outrage and agreement that PwC have behaved appallingly.
A Senate committee roasting the embattled consulting firm, accusing it of failing to crack down on serious unethical conduct, going so far as to suggest managers condoned it.
PwC have let their desire for money trump their ethics.
The parliamentary probe triggered by revelations a senior partner, invited by the federal government to help draft multinational tax avoidance laws, had used that confidential information to help PwC's clients avoid being caught up.
The Australian people have got every right to be absolutely filthy about what's happened here.
The Senate committee's interim report demanding
an ROV, or remote operated vehicle, from the vessel Horizon Arctic discovered the tail cone of the Titan submersible approximately 1,600 feet from the bow of the Titanic on the seafloor. The ROV subsequently found additional debris. In consultation with experts from within the Unified Command, the debris is consistent with the catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber. Upon this determination, we immediately notified the families. On behalf of the United States Coast Guard and the entire Unified Command, I offer my deepest condolences to the families. I can only imagine what this has been like for them, and I hope that this discovery provides some solace during this difficult time.
How crucial do you think this could be in trying to locate the Titan?
Well, it'll still be very, very difficult because all the information they've had so far in terms of contact has been active noise coming from the vehicle, from the submersible. And these ROVs, these remotely operated vehicles, they're noisy in their own sense. They're usually hydraulically powered. They have even if they have electric motors, they generate a lot of their own noise. And so the sonars they're fitted with are usually active, which are used for imaging, and they have cameras. So that will give you perhaps 2,000 to 3,000 meters of range on a sonar, but it'll just tell you there's a blob there. It won't necessarily tell you what the shape of that blob is. And they're working in a wreckage field that's 3 to 5 nautical miles around the Titanic. So using the ROV as a search asset is probably not the easiest thing to do when all of the clues that are coming out of the banging that they're hearing and using the hydrophones from the sonar buoys on the surface.
So what in your mind would be the right process to then give people, these rescue efforts, the best chance to actually find the submersible and potentially free it and get it to come up to the surface, if it is on the seabed, of course?
Well, what they'll be able to achieve by the use of the sonar buoys is that they'll be able to triangulate it by getting cross bearings from multiple sonar buoys, and they will then know where it is in a latitude and longitude sense. They won't necessarily know if it's on the surface or on the bottom, and the best way to work out that is to look on the bottom in the place where you think it is. If it's not there, it must therefore be somewhere above it. It's not likely to be in mid-water. It's much more likely to be on the surface or just underneath it or on the seabed.
Yeah. You know, you're just emphasising how complicated this task is, and we're now entering into this sort of uncharted territory, 96 hours, where technically oxygen could have run out. Given that we're still hearing particularly these banging noises, do you think that's not necessarily a time frame that we should fixate on?
I don't think it is. And in fact, oxygen is, everybody focuses on oxygen, but the most dangerous gas in this environment is carbon dioxide. And that's what each person generates. And the more carbon dioxide that's in the air, you actually just fall asleep, and it's a sleep from which you never wake up. So I'd be much more concerned about the carbon dioxide. You can actually survive with low levels of oxygen for quite a while, but you can't survive with high levels, and you can't perform properly, and you can't think properly with high levels of carbon dioxide.
And that's a really important point. I mean, there is a world-renowned expert on board. I guess that's very critical in terms of going through the proper processes and doing things that potentially can help you be found.
Indeed. And that Frenchman who's on board I think he's the key to their survival. He's the one who would have really understood the way gases work and the way life support systems work. He's also the one who would almost certainly be the one who's initiated this 30-minute interval banging on the side of the hull, because that is it's sort of sending a subliminal message to the searchers that I understand the way you're looking for me, and this is a clue that I'm actually the survivor here. I'm not just some random noise.
Tell me too, Frank, you know, even if they are able to triangulate the sounds and potentially locate it, one of the issues has been that it's potentially caught up in debris and part of the Titanic wreck. How tricky would an operation like that be to try and free a submersible? And is there any sort of vessel that could do that?
Oh, yes. In fact, these deep sea ROVs that are down there now are exactly the ones that can do that. Excellent. They've got the power, they've got the manipulators, they've got all of the systems to dislodge that and pull it free. The challenge is finding it first.
Yeah. What are your thoughts at this 96-hour juncture just passed?
Excuse me. My thoughts are confident, or hopeful anyway. I won't say confident because they still haven't found it. If they had managed to triangulate and actually get a position of the submarine and not know where it was in a depth sense, then I'd be much more confident. But I don't have that at the moment. So what I see at the moment, and I'm sorry, I've got some gas in my eye, which is cool. What I do find is that because this time is running out, because they are really getting to the extremes of their life support endurance, things are becoming really very challenging. And if they are near the surface, they're not easy to find because it's white. It hasn't got sensors that are going to alert.
So there you are, ladies and gentlemen, up to date on Australian Indian Radio. And as we move on with the news today, we know that car maker Ford is going to cut hundreds of jobs in Australia. This is something which I have been following with great interest. And I've commented on these as well before, look at Falcon and Holden. They are not being manufactured in Australia anymore. So this is one of the things that's happening in Australia is, when we're looking at the equality of, life and the lifestyle of everyone. So the standards that we have done, we have raised very high standards of our industrial relations, and of course our labour laws are great, so that all our workers are very well protected and very well paid. Hence, it makes it an unsustainable environment for manufacturing. Here's that report.
Another hit to an already fragile industry.
This will be a tough time for those Ford's workers and their families.
This is about the third time that we've seen that workforce shrink down.
Ford will shed around 400 jobs by September, the vast majority from product development and design in Geelong. It hasn't come as a surprise 7 years after the company stopped making cars in Australia.
Often when manufacturing leaves the country, innovation and R&D follow fairly quickly.
In a statement, Ford says the job losses are to improve efficiency and help meet future needs. It says Australia will continue to be central to the development of the Ranger and Everest. Some say there's cause for optimism.
Jobs are growing, especially in clean energy industries, also in defence industry technology. For skilled workers like this, we're very confident that there are jobs out there for them to pick up.
The defence industry is very much becoming the new auto industry.
But others want the losses to be taken as a warning sign.
Australia can't afford to lose more of that high-skilled workforce.
We send a message that actually automotive engineering and design isn't something we do in Australia. You have to go somewhere else to do that.
There's also concern other companies may follow in Ford's footsteps.
Inevitably, yeah, that will happen. Inevitably.
Ford says the cuts will be made through a voluntary redundancy process. Consultations with unions and staff over the job losses is expected to take about 2 weeks. Rachel Clayton, ABC News.
Such an unfortunate situation there, but what do we do? So that's what happens. Everything has consequences. Right now, the Ombudsman is calling for new rules on phone and internet service providers. I think about time that something get done.
Every call with Marina Devella's 97-year-old mother is a precious lifeline.
Are you in pain?
Yeah. Her Telstra landline is essential because it's the only number her mum remembers.
Love you.
So it was stressful when Marina's phone and internet stopped working for 3 weeks.
She was very worried. I was incredibly worried because I was relying on calling neighbours.
A new report reveals the top systemic issues investigated by the Telco Ombudsman. Number 1, poor sales practices. 2, billing charges and payment issues. 3, problems with the accessibility of services, especially for some vision impaired or elderly people.
I am fed up with seeing consumers in vulnerable circumstances being mistreated, and it's not good enough that we continue in this environment.
The Ombudsman wants the Albanese government to urgently regulate to reduce cases of unexpected debt and hardship.
The current consumer protections regime isn't fit for purpose, and customers are the ones that are falling through the cracks.
Consumers need better customer service. We need to have greater protection for our most vulnerable consumers. They need greater billing accuracy.
But the telco sector has defended the current industry code, saying it will be strengthened.
The Consumer Protection Code can be improved. We're working to do that now. It's not reasonable to say that the entire co-regulatory framework is not fit for purpose.
Marina backs the Ombudsman's call for harsher penalties for providers doing the wrong thing. The Communications Minister Michelle Rowland has urged the industry to do better and says she's assessing if the current framework is adequate. Michael Atkin, ABC News.
And as I mentioned before, about time something got done. There is so much, in that area that there's so much frustration between people. Many times we hear from people there's so many complaints, and especially when they're trying to call up the customer service or support, the service is non-existent. Well, right now there is a growing number of household people seeking housemates.
So I really moved from Melbourne to follow the good weather and come up to here Newcastle with good beaches and warmer weather. But I was aware that it's a very tight market for renting, so I was intending to share an apartment, which I'm in here, with another person. So I moved up to Melbourne in April, just after Easter, and unfortunately that person decided they didn't any longer want to rent and share. So now I've been left with paying full rent and really desperately seeking someone else to share my apartment with me.
And how much of your income, what proportion of your income is going on rent?
Currently 56% of my earnings goes on rent. So this, it's a dire situation.
Yeah, that's pretty tough. Look, Kerry, you're 65 years old. Did you imagine that at the age of 65 you'd literally be moving to another city, in part to find cheaper rent and also looking for a flatmate?
No, I did not, and I've been a property owner in the past, and through various circumstances I now find myself renting. I've got a lot of older women friends in the same position through employment loss or relationship breakdown, whatever. We're renting, and it's a very tough market, particularly when we're trying to put as much funds away into superannuation as we can.
Yeah, tell us what it's like trying to find a rental and trying to find a flatmate.
So I've noticed I've had my share apartment up in informal platforms and places like flatmates.com for about 6 weeks now. And I've had one person come to me and say, can I take a pet? And unfortunately, no, my landlord says no pets. So I've also noticed that there's a lot of other people looking to share their apartments and houses with other people. So I think cost of living is really biting, and so there's now a lot of competition for those people seeking share housing arrangements.
Yeah, which was borne out by those figures from flatmates.com, which we said earlier. How sustainable is paying over half of your income on rent for you?
It's not sustainable at all, and I'm just hoping that in the next couple of weeks I can find someone to share the rent. It's a beautiful location. Newcastle's got amazing features, beaches. It's a great city to live. There's a lot of employment here. So, I'm just really curious as to why I haven't had more people knocking at my door.
Now, we did see this week that Housing Australia Future Fund was not passed, and that's the Coalition and the Greens both voted against it. But the Greens are really voting against it because they say that there needs to be more action for renters. It would have brought in 30,000 new social and affordable homes. Where do you sit on that? Like, what do you think about how that's playing out in Canberra?
Look, I'm taking a balanced view of this. I've worked in areas for developing more affordable and social housing in various state government housing authorities. So I really understand the need to build more social housing and the urgency of that. But I also really think that the Greens at the moment are the only party that's really taking notice of the 1/3 of the population that now finds themselves renting. And we need someone going into bat for us. And at the moment, the Greens are the only party that are doing that.
Ladies and gentlemen, the number of people seeking a housemate census come all the way from Melbourne to Newcastle at age 65, trying to find a flatmate. Wishing her all the best. Well, right now, before we go into our break for today, let's look at the winter break at the Parliament.
So obviously housing has been the big issue this week. The Future Housing Fund, the Federal Treasurer is meeting with state treasurers today. Talk us through what they're planning to talk about and, what can we expect?
Yeah, so this will be a virtual meeting of the Treasurers, state, territory and federal today. They're going to talk about what states can do to speed up the process of boosting housing supply. So things like zoning laws, planning approvals, what more they can do to get more supply going quicker. What they're not going to agree to is this Greens demand for a freeze on rents. That's been at the centre of a lot of the debate here in Canberra this week. The Greens have moderated their demand. They say it doesn't have to be a freeze on rents because, look, the federal government, the states as well, say, hey, you freeze rents, you're going to scare off investors when we need more supply coming into the market. Nor are they going to spend their money on improving the existing housing stocks. There are a lot of problems with freezing rents. But the Greens have said, well, you could look at what the ACT does. Here where I am, the ACT has a Labor Greens local government here. They have some control on how much you can put up rent, how much landlords can put up rent each year. 110% of CPI, of the inflation rate each year. So they said, look, that's a model that the states could do, and they want the federal government to perhaps offer incentives for the states to do this. But no, I don't think we'll see agreement on anything like that. A lot of the states still have concerns about going down that path. Politically, this has been a really heated week on this issue, with the Greens making these demands and refusing to support, so far at least, this social housing fund the government wants to put in place, this $10 billion social housing fund. Labor's getting really frustrated. The Greens saying, look, we're the party of renters. You can see why they want to say that. Renters make up about a third of the nation, a very hotly contested cohort of voters. Labor's not having any of that. They're accusing the Greens of putting politics ahead of delivering more social housing. A lot of the community housing groups too are getting frustrated too. They just want this bill passed so that more housing stock can be built for those who need it.
So with it not passing, that could be seen as the first trigger for a double dissolution. Yeah. Walk us through that. How likely is that, do you think?
Look, I don't think an early election, certainly any time this year, is at all likely. A double dissolution, the government gets a trigger to call an early election if the Senate fails to pass a bill twice, with a 3-month gap in between each time. And what's happened this week, the government regards as the first failure to pass by the Senate, because they didn't back this housing bill. They instead deferred a debate, the Greens and the Coalition, until October. So the government's saying, strike one. We'll come back in a few months, do this again. If you vote it down again, we'll have the trigger for a double dissolution. So look, a few things. There are risks in calling an early election, right? Voters tend to like governments to fulfil their full term they were elected for. You might also end up with a Senate that's even less helpful to the government than the one they've currently got. And look, the priority this year is the Indigenous voice referendum. Nothing's going to get in the way of that. But next year, look, PMs do tend to like to have the trigger for an early election in their back pocket just in case they need it. I think right now, though, this is more about brinkmanship, about putting a bit more pressure on the Greens to say, hey, we really want you to back this and we're getting serious with our threats.
And speaking of the voice referendum, David, now that it has been passed by Parliament, do you think we're going to see a bit of politics taken out of it, or is there still going to be a lot of debate?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, I think for the next little while, we'll have the parliamentary winter break. So for 5 weeks, we'll get some respite from those question time clashes over the voice that certainly dominated this week. But no, I don't think the politics will be removed from this debate, not when you've got the Prime Minister and the opposition leader front and centre on opposing sides. There's so much at stake here, politically as well as for the nation, with this Indigenous voice proposal. So look, I don't think, yes, there'll be other voices in the mix in this debate, for and against, but you're not going to remove the politics from this. And boy, this week did we see a lot of that. The opposition really going after Linda Burney with questions, pressing her for questions about the scope of the voice. Will it weigh in on the date of Australia Day? Will it try to advise the Reserve Bank or the Defence Force? Look, the government reckons a lot of these things are straw men suggestions, far-fetched ideas about what the voice will do. It's trying to argue it will have a more limited scope in practice. But the reality is a lot of the voice advocates are saying there won't be a scope. They will have technically the power to give advice, and it's only advice, across whatever area of government it likes. The government's done better, I think, this week, where they've really focused on the practical benefits they see the voice delivering on education, health, stopping money being wasted in Indigenous affairs as well. That's where it needs to get this debate back to. It did that at times later in the week, but yeah, it was a pretty bruising argument this week over the voice.
So there you are, ladies and gentlemen, up to date on Australian Indian Radio. Right now, it's time to finish off with our functions and events. So there you are, ladies and gentlemen, up to date on Australian Indian Radio, and it's been wonderful having your company today, and I hope you've enjoyed our version of the news presentation today. Don't forget that tomorrow we have a very, very special event coming up where we will be talking about the upcoming Palki Festival, and we have the United Nations coming here. We have got so many different languages and so many different parts of India who are all supporting this event, and they will all be coming in here to talk about that and invite you to the Palki Sai Baba Palki Festival for 2023. That's coming up tomorrow at 10 a.m. We'd love to see you all there. And thanks everyone for the love you have shown for our live broadcast from the Gayatri Mandir in Bundal, which goes to air every Tuesday night. So if you haven't seen that, it's available on our Facebook channel and of course YouTube channel as well. You could go on, log in and have a look. Well, ladies and gentlemen, until tomorrow, it's goodbye from us.